Welcome back to The Heat. We're discussing China's evolving role in Latin America, from investment and trade to infrastructure projects. Let's get back to our panel. And let's go back to Jiang Shixue in Beijing. And Jiang Shixue, you know, China's involvement, as we've been discussing, is very big in Latin America. But I'm wondering how much of a two-edged sword this is, because China's going through an economic slowdown right now, and that in turn impacts those countries with which it deals with most. What happens? What is the impact of that when China has a slowdown?
Well, yeah, it is very interesting to note that in the past several years, China was criticized for buying too much commodities, and China was blamed for the so-called reprimarization of the Latin American economy, and in the past 1 or 2 years, China's economy is slowing down. China buys less from this South America and other parts of the world. So China has been criticized again for buying less commodities. So I really don't know what should China do. So just tell me what China should do, okay? So we cannot blame China for everything, okay? So I would say that China has made a great contributions to the economy of Latin America and in other parts of the world, even Africa and Europe and other parts of the world. So I hope that in the future we need to do away this kind of a wrong mentality of fear of China or China threat, okay?
Right, maybe the question is not what China can do, but what can the exporting countries do? And Diego, in that respect, I mean, do countries like Peru need to diversify more in their economic plan?
Totally. We need to diversify more. We need to export added goods aside from commodities and minerals. I mean, even if China slows down and their demand for minerals goes down, their demand for food will still be the same. And we could be a good supplier for that. Now, as an internal agenda, however, we need to increase competitiveness. We're not doing that well in competitiveness rankings, according to the World Economic Forum and other sources. And China can be strategic in helping us do it. For example, helping us build better infrastructure. Lima, for example, is a 10 million people metropolis with high growth forecasts. And we still don't have a railroad that interconnects Lima with its suburbs. That's a project that I believe President Pedro Pablo Kuczynski, PPK, is going to try to give some strength and have some investors be interested in that in his current visit in China.
And Ambassador, Chinese investments have looked a lot at infrastructure development. You take a country like Mexico, 14th biggest economy in the world, 64th when it comes to infrastructure. That's an ideal place for China to be, isn't it?
Absolutely, and we have to recognize that there are infrastructure deficiencies today in Mexico, not like elsewhere in the region. I would sometimes joke that if you were to put all of Brazil's double highways together, this would be the equivalent of the Mexico City Acapulco 4-lane highway. So yes, there are challenges, but there are also opportunities. I think that China is looking at this, especially port infrastructure projects. So I think there is a lot of space for this to grow and develop, and particularly, Anand, if as a result of TPP, and I'm a firm believer that you can chew and whistle gum at the same time by binding yourself to TPP, that does not mean that you can not continue to deepen your relationship and your network with China and with North America. If TPP does move forward, which is a big if because of what is happening today in a political electoral context in the United States and the ratification of TPP. But if TPP is to move forward, I think this really creates a new space of economic opportunity in the Pacific. And if you start looking at some of the ports and some of the infrastructure that Mexico has on its Pacific coast, I think there's a great deal of potential there for Chinese companies to invest in.
Pepe, just last week, Brazil and China signed a deal creating a $1 billion investment fund for Brazilian agriculture, and that'll be mainly in infrastructure, logistics, storage, and ports as well. You know, you mentioned earlier Brazil, of course, has a new president now, President Temer. How does this fit into his economic plans? Because he's been talking of Brazil's new open investment strategy.
Well, basically, it's an enormous privatization program because Brazilian companies at the moment, they are indebted, they are hostage of an absolutely appalling, horrendous political economic crisis that's been going on for almost 2 years now, and will keep going on even with what was actually regime change in Brazil, constitutional, institutional parliamentary coup, in fact. So this government is not popular with the absolute majority of the Brazilian population. It's very popular, though, with Wall Street, very popular with corporations that want to invest in Brazil, and obviously they know that they need China as a partner for this huge privatization program. So expect Chinese companies, some of them like already present in Brazil, like China Three Gorges, for instance, they'll be even more present from now on. But that creates also a problem for some sectors of Brazilian industry. I'll give you an example. The Brazilian shoe industry is one of the most sophisticated in the world. For instance, they design and export shoes to Dior here in Paris. This is something that the Chinese cannot compete with. But on the ground level, in terms of mass-produced shoes, the Chinese shoe industry practically decimated the Brazilian shoe industry. And this is something that in many sectors in Brazil was not very well regarded, to say the least, because there are few niches where Brazil can compete with value-added manufacturing on a global stage. And this was a case where, okay, they have a very, very small niche of luxury products that they can export, for instance, and design and export to Europe. But on a global level, the Chinese competition is absolutely massive, and it goes against Brazilian industrial interests. So this is very complicated. At long term, I would say that it requires an upgrade of Brazil's value-added manufacturing. And this is something that was not part of the plans of Lula and Dilma's government. And they are paying, now they're paying a heavy price for it because there was no plan B. Plan A was basically export more commodities and mostly to China.
And Jiang Shixue, when we look at political uncertainties like Diego has been Pepe has been talking about in Brazil or perhaps in Venezuela as well, and Chinese economic planners are looking at the amount of money they have for investment, where that money goes. Does China take into consideration how its investments are going to be protected, let's say, in mildly unstable political environments?
Yes, you're right that China should pay more attention to the safety or more profits of the so-called Chinese investment in countries like Venezuela and other countries. But there are 33 countries. You cannot say that every country is safe and sound. So it is not easy for China to put the money in the correct place. But I want to mention that in the near future, China really should pay more attention to the so-called country risks. Okay, if you understand that there are some kind of country risks, you can avoid them. You can avoid making investment in some kind of so-called dangerous places. But well, you cannot say there are dangers, there are country risks, and China will just stand by and China stand back. So this is not the right way of doing things. But I want to mention again that in order to attract Chinese investment, countries in Latin America must improve their investment environment. By doing so, more Chinese money can go into the continent.
And Ambassador, there's another factor which we've heard about very often, and that is in the Chinese model for investment, whether it be in Latin America or Africa or other parts of Asia, there are no conditions, there are no strings attached. Does that make a big difference? Because we know that when the United States invests, there are strings attached.
Well, I think you have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. I think that there are some areas where this makes a huge difference, and there are others that it really does not, because either the depth or the complexity of that niche of the economy. I think that if you're a small and medium-sized business looking for partnerships, looking for investment in places like Latin America, certainly Mexico, this can be a great detonator of decision in one way or the other. So it certainly has played a role, but again, I think it's less prevalent in Mexico than I think you might see elsewhere.
Okay, and we have to end it there. Thanks to all of you for joining us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Arnold Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.